Thanks everyone for joining us today for this special LGIU Australia conversation. LGIU Australia's mission is to make local government in Australia collectively stronger by sharing ideas, resources and connections to tackle the big challenges of today and the future faced by local government. As you may be aware, we have a new theme-based format to bring you with curated insights on key policy topics each month. Today's session is part of April's focus on economic development and in particular community wealth building. Today we're lucky to be joined by Neil McInroy from Scotland, although he happens to be in Perth in Australia right now, not Perth, Scotland. Neil is an international leading urban economic policy expert in community wealth building and inclusive economic development. He's global lead at the Democracy Collaborative, formerly served as the Chief Executive of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies based in Manchester in the UK. And I visited him there a few years ago prior to COVID, and Neil's been influential in promoting policies that prioritise local economies, social justice and democratic ownership. Neil's been travelling around Australia and presenting keynote lectures and being part of panel discussions at the Economic Development Australia roadshow. And he's been in Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth, and he's been hot in all of those places. Looking forward to getting back to some cooler weather, I think. And he's been focused on inclusive place-based economic development and community wealth building in the presentations he's made. So in this session today, we might ask him about his broad experience, but also his reflections on his time in Australia and any new challenges and opportunities observed for the country's local government sector. So just a little introduction to community wealth building, and I'll get Neil to give just a few quick sentences because we want to get into the questions. But for those not familiar with community wealth building, it represents a paradigm shift in economic development with a focus on creating and retaining wealth within local communities by promoting democratic ownership, local investment and inclusive economic participation. It's about prioritising the role of anchor institutions, local enterprises, business cooperatives to build a more sustainable and equitable economy. So thanks, Neil, for joining us. We're going to share some content with our members about community wealth building, but quickly, how do you describe community wealth building in a few sentences, and what's your role been in the movement?
Yeah, hello everyone, and thanks, Pat. Well, I suppose the way to start is that, you know, economic development as we've known it for the past 20 or 30, 40 years, you know, it does a job, but it's not been a good enough job for many places, for the people, you know, for people and for the planet. And we need to go a little bit further and deeper, given the climate crisis, given the ongoing transition we need to make from fossil fuels. So community wealth building is the next step. It's the next iteration of an economic development approach, and it focuses on wealth, it focuses on patterns of wealth in place. And I suppose my background to community wealth building is that it's probably about 10, 15 years old now, and it came from a realisation that economic development wasn't truly cutting it. And so I believe that community wealth building is that next step in terms of focusing much more deeply on how does wealth and how does wealth flow within a place, and also how does that economy that we are creating in economic development truly work for people, truly work for the places, and truly work for our planet.
Okay, so you've been in Australia for about a week now. Just give us a little bit of an insight into what you've been doing here, and perhaps diving in straight away about some of your key observations on the Australian economy from a community wealth building perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I've been here for 3 weeks now, actually, and in your fine country, being very hot, as you say. Seems like the heat's following me around Australia, but I suppose that's for everyone. Look, Australia in many ways is a peculiar economy because you have quite significant economic success with the mining industry. You have an economic buoyancy there, and in some ways you're kind of insulated from some of the woes that we see in other parts of the world, particularly Europe and the USA. But you have got the abiding issue of climate crisis, and there is a need to make that transition away from fossil fuels. There's a need, I think, to create a economy that's more diverse, more plural in its nature. So I think community wealth building offers an opportunity for many localities across Scotland, across Australia, to actually start to reconfigure their economy in ways that genuinely works, as I say, for people, place, and the planet. And I think it's probably hard in Australia to make that step because you don't have, I mean, you have poverty, you have inequality, but not to the same extent you would see in the USA or perhaps in Europe. So you're the lucky nation, as somebody says, you're the lucky country. And I think it's hard when things most people do quite well here to actually think, well, why do we want to make the change? Why do we want to make the pivot? I think it's hard. You're not forced in a sense. So I think you need to find that need within yourself to actually think, look, moving longer term, we need to actually change the way the economy works, and economic development through community wealth building is the way to achieve that.
Yeah, one of the things we've certainly had our areas that have deindustrialized, and there's been pain and restructuring through some of those processes, but we're a very urban nation. And so, we've probably benefited from the transition to a service economy, which is urban focused. So I don't know whether whether that's maybe a point of difference to say Britain or to say parts of the US.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Yeah, and obviously you've got isolate cities that part service their own demand in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
I do think it's interesting in some of the, as when we visited Castlemaine part, some of these areas where there has been an older industry and those places have not quite got back to where they were, or also what's happening in Hunter Valley with the transition from fossil fuels there. I think there's interesting possibilities in those locations for community wealth building because I believe the transition that's required in those places, traditional economic development won't probably cut it. And I think community wealth building lends to say what's happening in Hunter Valley or in areas like Castlemaine or Ballarat, these more rural industrial areas. I think there's potential there for community wealth building to gain traction.
Yeah, all right. Well, look, let's talk a little bit about what we did in Castlemaine. So with you, Neil, we ran a masterclass for some of the councils that are in that central Victorian area who happen to be also within the area that's seeking World Heritage listings for its goldfields history. We were joined by Melina Morrison, who's the Chief Executive of the Business Council for Cooperatives and Mutuals, and we had a really interesting day, I thought. What did you take from that experience about opportunities in those areas, and maybe just reflecting on what the participants told us about what they took from the day and what they might focus on in their day-to-day work as economic development practitioners?
Yeah, no, there's probably three things I took away, really. I don't know how enlightening they are, but there's certainly I took away from it. Firstly was the desire to create place where well-being is a feature, particularly in Castlemaine. So there is this lens of well-being and how you create generalized well-being for population, and how does economic development facilitate that well-being. And I think that lens is a very important macro. It's placemaking, it's the milieu of place, it's how do people feel good about their place. I think all that is a really important lens to see a different type of economic development through community wealth building take hold. The second thing I took was, look, in terms of the 5 pillars of community wealth building, and in terms of all the different mechanisms, elements, projects that are indicative of community wealth building, you have them in Australia. You have many of the examples that we see across the world in the community wealth building world. The issue here is, how are they being scaled? How are they being amplified? They're kind of on the margins. So you've got community ownership of things, you've got community land trusts, you have credit unions, but how do they scale up? And I think that's the key. And I think economic strategy needs to dig in around that scaling up, because that's the beautiful stuff. That's the key stuff for CWB. And the third thing I took from it was, particularly from Melina and the work of BCCM, you know, economic democracy, cooperatives, employee-owned firms, community ownership. These are really, really important for community wealth building. And I could see a real interest in the participants around when Melina was speaking and talking about those types of ownership forms, because that gives people a genuine stake in the economy, those ownership forms. And also what they do is they also relate deeply to place. If a cooperative, the workers are owning that company and they make decisions for the benefit of that company in that place. They're not distant shareholders. They have a relationship to that place and their industry. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, those three things come to mind really. The well-being economy, the instances you do have of community wealth building, how we do scale them, and then this real interest and fascination with forms of economic democracy. And if I may add, Pat, the next day after that, well, in Sydney, I was fortunate to go to a breakfast dinner breakfast in the New South Wales Parliament, uh, invited by BCCM, and I met many people involved in the cooperative and employee ownership movement there, and there was real buzz in the room, and I think that perhaps traditionally cooperatives have been seen as marginal within the Australian economy. I think there's something there where there's a heady brew, and I think there's a real potential for them to grow. And that form of economic democracy is key for community wealth building and our economic development future.
Yeah, I really saw those participants at our masterclass get animated about the possibilities of the cooperative sector, and in fact, almost like they hadn't thought of it before. It was a penny dropping moment, I think, for some of those participants, which was lovely to see.
I mean,
Yeah, go on.
yeah, just it's interesting sticking back to the heritage of all that cooperation and within Australia, and there is a great tradition there. And also, we were fortunate to also visit the Eureka Stockade in Ballarat, and there you have, if not a cooperative, you had the cooperative spirit of the mine workers coming together collectively to say we want to work together to get our just deserts. We want to be collectivized to get our just deserts. And so that tells us something. The idea of cooperation within our economy, the idea of cooperatives and employee-owned firms is something in the human spirit. And I do think that needs to be unleashed in Australia, that collective human spirit to work to create an economy that works for all of us, for all places, and of course, for the planet.
Look, let's think about other opportunities. You mentioned the Hunter region, which is transitioning from coal to renewables. Again, it's an area that's been through its transitions before, particularly the lower Hunter, where we had the steel industry move out. In effect, BHP was a major industrial enterprise there, employed a lot of people. So it's experienced with transition in the past and pretty successfully actually. But what's in store for that region in terms of transitioning from coal to renewables and less carbon emitting forms of energy production?
I won't pretend to know enough about the Hunter. It's a Hunter Valley region. I won't.
And we've got other regions in Australia, of course, which are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I won't pretend to know much about it. But what I would say generally is that there's two things that need to happen in the transition. One is, of course, one needs to move from fossil fueled industry, those big polluting industries, to something that is net zero and decarbonised. So that takes big power, that takes big heft and big economic development levers. And I know there's probably state and federal Commonwealth funds to support that in those areas. But it also, there's an important thing about the energy transition is that when we move from oil and gas, which are very, they're centred in particular localities. Yeah, they are by their very nature. They're in wells. They're in a locality. They're not distributed. They're focused in particular regions. The energy transition will be more distributed. It will be more. It will be more. There'll be individual solar activity, wind energy in many locations, and that is a different spatiality to the energy sector. So I think that's a really important thing to recognise. This is not a transferring of one industry to another industry in the same location. It's actually a location that has the energy to a more distributed system. So that needs quite a significant leap and change in terms of the imagination of the destiny of that locality. So again, I don't know the specifics, but in terms of the Hunter Valley area, the idea that you're going to replace one industry with another new industry, I think needs a little bit more thought. There needs to be a plural set, a new reimagination of what the economic destiny for that locality and region is. And Europe tells us some lessons through their own just transition programme and what's happening in areas across Europe where they're going through similar programmes of transition. And in that, rebuilding the economy of place from its very foundational stones, I think, is the way forward. And in that, community wealth building, including co-ops, have a key role to play in that.
Just on, I know you've got some fairly direct experience of how community benefit schemes by big investors in renewable energy in Scotland could be harnessed and leave a better legacy than perhaps, you know, that a superficial approach would enable. And we're in this point right now where we're thinking about policy for community benefit schemes associated with renewable investment in different parts of Australia. What do you think? What lessons can we draw from your knowledge or from experience in Scotland on these things?
I mean, in Scotland and Canada, in Scotland particularly, there is a statutory guidance that says communities who are in the in the immediate area of a wind turbine, particularly in Scotland, they get £5,000 per megawatt. So that's a community benefit that is paid directly to those communities who are living in the shadow of those wind turbines. There is debate about in Scotland about that's a blanket £5,000. There's a debate in Scotland of whether it should be based not just on megawatt per hour. It should be based on productive capacity, because some wind turbines are more productive and have more generate more energy than others. So there could be an increased rate. So those community benefit schemes are providing, as we speak, benefits for a number of communities across Scotland. Also, it's important, though, now to ensure that there is community or municipal stake in those energy schemes. And there is now guidance that says all schemes in Scotland should offer shared ownership to communities so they can take a percentage stake in those schemes. So it's not just a benefit, it's actually an equity share in those schemes, and they get a return accordingly. There's also now a debate in Scotland of whether those there should, in a sense, be a national wealth fund that top slices, if you like, the across all those schemes for a national fund. So it would be communities would take a stake, or the nation, or the country would take a stake, Scotland would take a stake, and there would be a return back to the nation.
So that's like a belated, like a sovereign wealth fund, right?
Indeed. But my lesson would be is we can't just think about community benefits. It's important from a community wealth building perspective that there is forms of municipal or community ownership stake in those schemes. And as I said before, the fact that they're distributed, it's not centred on a particular region, it's distributed everywhere, means there should be more opportunities for communities and municipalities to actually start to generate their own either fully owned or part ownership of a energy renewable scheme.
Yeah, I think reflecting on some of the things you've mentioned, I do think there are seeds of community wealth building going on at a bottom-up level in councils around the country. We're now seeing this opportunity through the renewable energy zones and the prospect of community benefit schemes. But I think maybe one of the things that we're missing so far is our state governments getting on board. You know, so actually setting up frameworks and setting up possibilities and lightening up the imagination around these opportunities. I still see a bit of a gap there, and I know, you've been working at the Scottish national government level to sort of bring that more of a top-down perspective and provide some guidance on these things. So yeah, so what about those comments I've just made, Australia, and then the comparison with Scotland?
Spot on, Pat. We can't let the market alone um, will not provide the um, the return to communities, yeah, and an effective distributed energy, an effective and secure and resilient energy system on its own. It does need the hand of the state on this, and obviously you've got lessons from the Europe, where you have large state-owned vehicles who not only take stakes in energy renewable, but also um, uh, by being involved in the marketplace, help to steward and cajole and nudge and take leading positions in terms of the market about how it should function in terms of energy security and energy resilience. So we need an activist state, I think, in this transition. And that includes a stake in the energy renewable itself, but also effective policies like the one I was talking about in terms of community benefits and providing guidance and support for communities or municipalities to enable them to take a stake. So and it is important for energy security purposes. We need to have plurality of energy supply, plurality of ownership. It creates a resilient network of energy. And the idea that we can be dependent on one or two big operators, I think, that's the bygone age. Security requires a plural and distributed forms of ownership of energy renewables. In fact, I would say it's similar for all industries, that distributed plural sets of ownership and diversity within sectors, any economic sector, is very important for security and resilience reasons.
Yeah, so just so happens there's a correspondence or a coincidence between the nature of transitioning to renewable energy, which is distributed, and the possibilities of community wealth building, which are parallel with that.
No, absolutely. That's why community wealth building has matured from it still is a place-based approach to economic development, but it's also making inroads into particularly the energy renewable sector because it's the sector approach to community wealth building, and of course, energy renewable sector is particularly important to this because it's by its very nature it is distributed rather than centred.
All right, we're winding down now. I might just ask you just quickly. I know you've been in South Korea. I think you might have even been to Poland. What have you been doing in those jurisdictions or those far-flung places?
Well, generally, I mean, community wealth building, many areas are picking up an interest in community wealth building because they can see the flaws in traditional economic development, and people are looking around for ways by which they can make their own economy work more effectively. As I say, for people,
and just to intervene, remembering now that this is for LGIU, are you dealing with local councils and local government in those jurisdictions?
Sure, yeah. There's about three. We're working with the Hope Institute in South Korea, who are a local government think tank, really, a local government membership body, and there's about 4 or 5 areas that are localities, that are municipalities that are interested in taking forward community wealth building, all for different reasons. In fact, when I go back to Scotland, tomorrow, the week after, I have a delegation of South Korean local authorities coming to visit Scotland. And in Poland, the Poland work was very much relating to the just transition and the transition in the energy sector, and looking to use community wealth building, particularly building of co-ops within the Eastern Wielkopolska region, which is a brown coal area around Poznan in central Poland, and seeing that like the Hunter Valley in a way, seeing community wealth building as an opportunity to reconfigure the economy in that place.
Great. All right. Look, last point. You can imagine the world's in some turmoil. There seems to be a few headwinds which we're confronting at the moment. What do you say to the people? Say it's all too hopeless. You know, it's just too hard. What's the message?
I think the message is the message is that there's beautiful things all around us that foreshadow the bigger change, including things like co-ops, and I think um, uh, they're the things we need to focus on. And also, people naturally are human social beings. They like to come together and think through problems, think through solutions together. And I do think that in some way our economy has kind of lost touch with people in our places. And I think the way forward through these crises is to reconnect people or the economy with our places and with our
Sure.
people. And community wealth building is a key, is a surefire way of doing that.
Yeah, it's a disconnect, isn't it, between
Yeah,
the people's lived experiences and the economy they see around them, and we just have to make that reconnection.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Neil. Fantastic for that. We'll provide a link to some other content and previous content on community wealth building, and we've also in the process of a bit of a write-up of our time at Castlemaine and what we learned from the day with some of those Goldfields councils. For more information about LGIU Australia, head to our website or follow us on LinkedIn. But on that note, thanks, Neil. Safe travels home, and it's been great having you in the country. We've had some fun together and also spent some times experiencing regional Australia together, which was great.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.